So, what we are going to do is have a real panel, real people, with no IT, and just some good old-fashioned discussion. So, what I wanted to start with was trying to define to some extent what we mean when we say the sharing economy. A lot of times, the way that I start this is how do we identify the people involved? And for me, sharing economy participants are really worker-owned businesses, they're housing cooperatives, they're car sharing, skill sharing programs, they're grocery store cooperatives, they're renewable energy cooperatives. And really the thread that runs through all of the sharing economy has to do with drawing on and fully utilizing the assets already existent in a community. And so I think what's really exciting about this concept, and a reason that a lot of people in this room, a lot of people are participating in this, is the very reason that there's incredible potential in the sharing economy to make a real impact, a real transition in the traditional economy. So the way that I look at this, and really the thing that's beautiful is that it has social justice and environmental implications, right? So what you have on one side is a way for community organizations and businesses to create wealth and keep wealth within the community that they're actually existing in. And then on the other side, it's taking goods and services and actually being able to fully utilize those among multiple people and not just single owners. So what if, seriously, the sharing economy has the potential to not only transform the way that we personally connect to the economy, but also transition the economy itself. So we're going to get into it, have a big picture conversation about what the potential is, what obstacles we face, and what direction we can actually be heading in with the sharing economy. So the panel today is a perfect example of what we mean by the sharing economy. So I'm going to introduce everyone. On the far right, we have Zane Selvins. He is a board member for the Boulder Housing Coalition. We have Karen Warminghouse, the executive director of Ego Car Share. We have Jordan Mann, the co-founder of the Sharing Economy. We have Sarah Brody, co-founder of the Second Kitchen Grocery Cooperative. We have Dick Peterson, the co-founder of the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center, and Russell Evans, the co-founder of Transition Lab. So let's give them a round of applause. So we're going to start this off by the big question. What is the real impact of the sharing economy, and what implications are you seeing in your work in Boulder or in the state of Colorado?
You play rock, paper, scissors. I can start. I'll talk about Transition Lab more in a little bit because we're all going to have some time to speak about our programs. But I was in a position where I wanted to start a school and I had only $5,000. And there's also all these people in this room that you're faced with so many things that you would love to be doing, but you can't do because you're short on money. And so for me, it really all started with this idea of my wife and I had about $250,000 debt, including like college loans and buying our house. And that's probably really familiar to everybody in this room, right? And we would love to be participating and doing more social activism, community gardening, all these things that we know we need to be doing to build a resilient future, but we didn't have the time. And so I had this friend, Evan Lavin, who had just finished a woofing program, so he was a really skilled organic gardener, but he also had a bunch of college debt. And so he was in a situation where he had to go to work in the traditional economy instead of putting to use the skills that he loved. My wife and I had a guest bedroom, and we said, wait a minute, this is really easy. Why don't you move in with us? And we'll just do a basic rent exchange, and you can be our gardener. And that idea really came from what Kip Nash did in Boulder here a couple of years ago. But the difference between that is instead of like trying to start a CSA, it was just our yard. And so we worked it out, $500 a month. Average labor is $10 an hour. That's 50 hours a month. That's plenty to convert 3,000 square feet of Kentucky bluegrass into permaculture garden. And we did that. So in that first year, he saved $4,000 on rent, put that straight into paying off his college bills. We got the thing that we wanted just by using this traditional economy. And so when I'm looking at the really, really big picture, if I say to everybody in this room, raise your hand if you have $500 to use to like pay for activism and community gardens and all that sort of stuff a month. All right, we got one. Sweet. We got to talk to you about donations. but for everybody else, it's like, okay, now let's do another activity. How many people here have a guest bedroom and would love to see other like these kinds of projects launched? Community garden programs, banning plastic bags, 350, that kind of project. Who's there? Okay. Now I want you to keep your hands up. And now, how many people who are here in their 20s are currently paying probably about $1,000 for utilities and rent? Raise your hands. Okay, sweet, that's it. Now just put your hands together. We can save a bunch of money and get a bunch of work done.
So I'd like to respond to this. So the Boulder Housing Coalition develops housing co-ops in Boulder, and we get some money from the city's permanently affordable housing fund just to get the houses bought and converted into co-ops. And so we do this kind of thing in a systematic way, where we now house about 50 people in 3 houses, and we have every single room full, and people pay a lot less in rent and a lot less in food in this context than they would in the broader rental market. And we're not the traditional low-income housing population that a lot of people think of. A lot of people who live in the co-ops are involved in social enterprises or working for nonprofits or using that kind of surplus value that wouldn't exist if they were renting out a 2-bedroom apartment for $1,500 a month to do other things in the community. So yeah, you can do it peer-to-peer. Anybody who has a spare bedroom and other people who feel like they're paying too much in rent, or you can build an organization around that kind of more efficient and complete utilization of existing resources.
Yeah, and I think that housing is one of these aspects, and there's also transportation, which I'm sure Karen can talk a lot about, and there's food cooperatives and worker and all these different aspects. If we start to build systems around them, I think we have a much better way of utilizing resource. So if we start to say, okay, housing is something that's underutilized, everyone has extra rooms, and then we can meet that need either peer-to-peer or with organizations that are just actually using houses to their full potential. And same with...
Except that it's illegal.
Oh, and Boulder, yeah, absolutely illegal.
I think the council, after just having gone through the election, the council is so prime, and I think that those regulations should get changed and will get changed very quickly. We've got great people like Zane working on that
especially if you're coming to
issue.
city council meetings.
So look for that to change very soon in Boulder. Just to laying the foundation again for sharing economy and touching on transportation too, to illustrate that aspect. Raise your hand if your household owns at least 1 automobile. And keep that hand up if yesterday you drove that car. So take a look at how many hands are on there. But keep your hand up if yesterday you drove or you actually used it more than 1 hour. Like you were actually using it more than 1 hour. Wow, dramatic. And then keep your hand up if you used it more than 2 hours yesterday. Okay, great. So what that illustrates, on average, the average car is only driven 1 to 2 hours out of every day. What happens the other 22 to 23 hours? It just sits there, parked, taking up valuable real estate. It's a marvel of engineering just sitting there underutilized that we pay thousands of dollars for, but it's so completely underutilized. So that's one of the prime things, and that's why, in my view, car sharing is one of the first entrants into the sharing economy, because it's such a no-brainer of the economies and economies of scale and utilizing that, because it's used so inefficiently right now. So why do we all need our own car when we just want to get from point A to point B? So car sharing, what that does is fundamentally changes the economics of how we use cars. If we want to just pay as we use it, we pay by the hour, pay by the mile to use something like that. So you get what you really want is the transportation, not 2,000, 3,000 pounds of metal. You're not really interested in the metal, you're interested in the movement and the transportation it provides you. So that illustrates to me just like the fundamentals of sharing economy and how we can utilize that. I have plenty more to say though as we get into some of the other questions, because as car sharing being one of the new entrants, and now as car sharing's been around in the US for 10, 20 some years in Europe, as we see it getting increasingly commercialized and corporatized, but I'm going to save those comments for later.
Very cool. So it looks like we have a general idea from the panel responses about what people are involved in. I thought it'd be interesting to open up a question with the way in which we can see the scale of this and the different ways we can interact. I'm going to give all the panelists right now a flash 1-minute way of describing what your organization does, who you are, and basically your connection to the sharing economy. Maybe go 2 minutes if you're feeling ambitious.
You want to kick it off, Zane, and we'll just go in a
Like
circle?
I said, I'm on the board of the Boulder Housing Coalition. We develop cooperative housing in Boulder, and that's really, all that is a big household with, 10 to 26 people. Our newest co-op is 26 people, including families, who, fully occupy a building and pool labor and resources to buy food together, so you get economies of scale in food. And really what you're doing is, beyond a certain number of people, and it's around 10 people, it becomes worthwhile to set up some systems in the household to kind of organize the money and organize the labor into a more efficient system. And once you get to that scale, you can drop the per person costs pretty dramatically. So in our co-ops, you can live within walking distance of the Pearl Street Mall on an income of less than $12,000 a year, covering all of your utilities, your rent, and your food, which is pretty extraordinary in Boulder. So that's what we do. And there's a lot of things you can do with that, either extra income that you're not spending on the daily goods, or on the extra time that you have, because you don't have to work 50 hours a week to live in town on a service wage.
I'm Karen Warminghouse. I'm the director of Ego Car Share. We're a nonprofit 501c3 that's local here just to Boulder and Denver. And I won't say that much about us organization-wise, but if you do want any info, there's brochures in the back table back there, and also a join for free coupon. So my little shameless plug there. We've been around since 2001. We formed as a community organization back in 1997. We were actually one of the very first in the U.S. to form. Hence we have the URL carshare.org, so we're very proud of that. So when we started, it was very, what is this car share thing? It's a very Boulder thing. Denver news reporters would be like, what is this hippie Boulder thing going on, and why would anybody ever share a car, and what's going on with this? So it's been really interesting to see the industry and public perception change from 1998 to now where we are. And seeing Hertz, Avis, Zipcar, Car2Go, all these entrants get into the market when it was so many eyebrows raised back in the day. Where we are now as so we started out as an organization, all volunteer for about the first 10 years of our organization. We took on donated vehicles, loan vehicles. We didn't have any capital to purchase the vehicles, so it was incredibly a grassroots effort, and just the community coming together to get started. We thankfully, starting in 2009, we finally started getting some grant funding, so we now have 45 vehicles and over 3,000 members. That's in both Boulder and Denver. So the whole concept is that basically it's a pay-as-you-drive system for car usage. You get online, you reserve a car for what you need. If I'm going to go do errands later today that for some reason I can't use my bike for, but in Boulder mostly you can. But say I need a car for 2 hours, I would just reserve out a car for 2 hours, just pay for that 2 hours of what I'm using it for. Insurance, gas, everything included, but I'm only paying as I use it. So rather than owning a car, when I had a car back in 1998, I had a car, I tried to drive it as little as possible. It sat there, the battery would go dead. Because I wasn't using it, I was paying incredible amounts for maintenance. It was just a really inefficient way of having access to a car when I only needed it a couple times a month. As an organization now, then we're really trying to go for a diversity of vehicles. We have several on the CU campus. We have all-wheel drive vehicles, pickup trucks, minivans, just really making it to be so that people, especially in Boulder, where you can get along by bike and bus so readily and easily, and as a nonprofit, we really want people to drive as little as possible. Our mission is to provide and promote alternatives to individual car ownership, thereby reducing the environmental and social effects of cars. So we want people to first and foremost be biking and walking and riding the bus, and essentially using us and cars as a last resort. So it's a funny business model on that aspect, where we're trying to put everything else out there and say, no, do you really need to go to the airport? Take the bus. It's a much better trip, much more cost effective. But by changing the economics of it, you really start to choose the mode that matches your need. So yeah, that's a little bit about us, but yeah, 501c3, staying just in the Boulder, Denver area and looking to expand that. But I know we've gotten a lot of interest from Longmont, Lyons, Nederland, so we'll probably be staying in Boulder County, basically mirroring RTD's service area. And we're very transit-based, meaning we want people, so for instance, we have a car down at Market Street Station. So if you have a meeting down in Denver, You take the BX down there. If your meeting is not along transit routes for some reason, then you can take the BX down, get in the car at Market Street Station, drive to your meeting for 2 or 3 hours, drive back, and then take the bus back to Boulder, that sort of thing. So that whole stretch on 36, you're not doing in a car. You're shifting that to bus and shifting it to things that are much better for you personally, economically, as well as the community.
Yeah, Karen.
Did I take 2 minutes? So if you want to join, there's coupons back there.
My name's Jordan Mann, and as a professional, I work as an energy efficiency consultant, but some things I'm really passionate about are creating a more connected community. And the ways that I'm engaging in that are with the Boulder Housing Coalition as well. I'm on the board with them, and also creating this Boulder sharing economy network. And the idea behind that is to take different groups that are already involved, like Ego Car Share or the Second Kitchen, and start to connect them and have them work together, as opposed to being satellites, and have sort of a central area where people who want to engage in the sharing economy, whether it's as a sharing economy consumer or business owner, can have a central place to network together. And then also working with Shareable Sum out of San Francisco to try to bring that network into a more national network of sharing economy groups. So I'll keep that one short. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sarah Brody, and I'm a co-founder of the Second Kitchen Food Co-op that is just 2 months old, that opened up on the Hill at 9th and College Avenue, so really close to campus. If you haven't checked it out, you should. What we are and how we came to be, and our mission is to create community around food mindfulness and appreciation within the cooperative model. So we are a community-owned and member-run food co-op. Right now we have 200 households and a lot of awesome volunteers that have already started to come into the store and volunteer and work the store to keep it really really sustainably going with volunteers. What we find is that you want to put your money where your mouth is. Is that how it goes? Is that? I always mix up sayings. And with the cooperative model, you have, as a member, you have the say and the ownership of the co-op to know where your food is coming, to have an influence on where it comes from and why we should have it in the store. We live in a world, especially in Boulder, full of grocery stores where there are so many options to choose from, but most of the time we don't really know where it comes from or why. And we really are trying to create an alternative food system and a way for people to purchase food that's not only sustainably grown, organically grown, locally grown, but chosen by the members for the members. And
not full of preservatives?
No preservatives. Are you kidding me? I don't know what natural flavors are, but somebody needs to define that for me. So we're really working in the cooperative model, and food co-ops all across the country exist, but they are hard to sustain in a world that's just full of Whole Foods, especially Boulder. So we're trying to really start a movement and start a community where people know where their food is coming from and have a say on pricing and sourcing. So we're growing our membership. If you guys are interested in joining or knowing what we're all about, this is a place for the Boulder community. So we are open to sharing our economy as a co-op, and then also supporting our local food economy, which is definitely something that needs to be supported right now. So that's a little bit about Second Kitchen, and you can visit our website if you want to know more about how we got started, but that's all I'm going to say right now. Thanks.
I'm Dick Peterson, and I'm from Denver, not from here. I'm with the Rocky Mountain Employee Ownership Center. Basically what we do, and that is just promote worker co-ops. There's lots and lots of co-ops. The worker co-op, where the worker owns the business, runs it. Those are democratic votes. They run the place. There's big ones, there's small ones. If somebody are interested in a thing I just ran across about 2 days ago, and I brought some sheets with me. There's 2 big grocery store co-ops, speaking of stores, in America right now. that compete out and out. These are worker co-ops, totally worker co-ops. One's in Florida, they can compete with Walmart. And to get a sense of what's going on here, Walmart has more business than its next 3 competitors combined. It's not, it's a serious business. This is serious. This is not like, you know, a Safeway store near me in Denver just recently closed. I hear other ones are gonna close.
Yeah.
So you think, can anybody really compete? Well, all of a sudden, there's a big one in Florida, has 8,900 employees, and Walmart cannot make an impact in Florida. In Idaho, there's another one. Well, I happened to just run off a few comments. I think I got 9. So I was so excited, I'm ready to go to Idaho and say, will you expand down here? And I'm serious on that. But anyway, we believe in the word structural change is something where we're changing society, not just helping poor people. Changing society is what we are about. In other words, once the employee ownership is in place, it can be sold. We're trying to structure that so it can't be sold so easily, because sometimes they're so successful, the employees sell out. And that's a problem. It's a real problem, to be frank with you. I mean, you're working at a place and you're paying $70,000 and somebody said, I'll give you $200,000 for your share, or $300,000, it's hard to say no. And so we're working on that one, but that's all we're about. I did bring some brochures if you're interested. Now you're ahead of Denver, to be frank with you. And Denver and Colorado is behind most of the rest of the country in this matter. We are really behind. Wisconsin, New England, California, Portland, Oregon, Los Angeles, Austin, Texas is moving. New York City, the Bronx has got an enormous co-op going there, some co-ops there. We are very much, but we do have some. You have one of the most famous ones right here, Namaste, which is a totally worker-owned co-op. Another one that you maybe know about in your drinking time, and that's New Belgian Brewery for college, and that is just as this year 100% employee-owned. They work closely with us. Some other ones that you may not know, CM2H Hill, which is one of the larger engineering firms out of England in America, is all employee-owned. They have a stock ownership plan there. Another one is Phipps Construction. This is part of the Jerry Phipps, who was the first owner of the Broncos when they lost every game. So you may remember that. I've been around that long. But he decided when he was getting old to sell it or give it, however that worked out, to his employees. So his employees now own. I mean, you see it around. It's the one that has the cover over the state capitol, doing the Capitol Dome construction right now. So there are a lot of other ones around, but they don't. Most of them don't talk to each other like New Belgium and Namaste do and do us. But that we just believe that makes sense. Put the employees in charge, control it. And on top of that, they work better. And they are interesting. Almost always they are environmentally sensitive. So anyway.
That's the time.
Later. Anyway.
So I'm gonna bring kind of a sobering note to all of this, and it's that I started Transition Lab really because 1, we're out of time, and 2, I don't have any faith that the powers that be are going to solve our problems. I don't think anybody in this room even has that faith. And it was really funny because Jake and I were just speaking at MIT a couple days ago. And Jake was sitting between Obama's environmental coordinator and a guy who had just started working for the World Bank. We're having dinner with these people. And Jake goes, you know what, I just don't believe in the financial system. I think it's a big pyramid scheme. And they both just went like this.
Yeah.
like there was no argument. There was, and then I don't know. That's really like it's funny, but it's like frustrating. It's like there's so many people in positions of power that aren't really doing what they need to be doing to solve this. And so when I made Transition Lab, when I formed it back in 2010, what really needs to happen and why these people on this panel are awesome, and you guys are so great. Thank you, CU, for producing these kinds of people. What we really need to be doing is looking at shared economy resources that can be accessible, viable, and replicable, and we need to be doing that right now. We need to be doing it yesterday, but it needs to happen right now. And so what I did starting Transition Lab was, okay, well, if I'm just going to pull out all the plugs and try to do something completely different, how would I do that? And we've basically done it in a couple ways to go on your first question of like, how are we sharing? We're a school, we're a college, teaching all the skills necessary to build a resilient future. Now that's a lot of stuff, but here's how we've done it. Dorms, using guest bedrooms in the community, paid for, done. More economically efficient, done. Food, instead of buying our own farms, we're just working with existing organic farmers in the valley, and they're the people who know what's going on. They're the people who need the extra help, and we're just doing work shares 4 hours a week for food shares with them. So right there, food, utilities, and rent taken care of. Then from that point, I've been bringing in people from around the world, basically the most awesome people possible who know some of these skills to teach the other stuff. For example, one of the people who's teaching at my school taught at the Highlander Folks School. Does anybody know what the Highlander Folks School is? Oh man, it's not surprising, but this is a part of American history that we missed. Highlander Folk School taught Rosa Parks civil disobedience before she ever sat down on the bus. Did you know that? She was trained in all of these things before she did that. And so we've been bringing together people like that to really teach the skills of food production, knowledge of self, affordable housing, community engagement, and entrepreneurship. And we're doing it. And we just got back from a 2-week tour in the Northeast. We won this huge award at MIT for being the most viable, accessible, and replicable model that MIT identified as reducing CO2 on a local scale. So yeah.
Hey.
And now we're just really, I know the model's viable, and now I'm just looking for people to get involved. And I can talk a lot about that and meet with me. Some of you are coming to dinner with me afterwards. You're all invited. I can't pay for anybody. We're going to have to share the check. But yeah.
So I think what we're all getting a sense to, and I'll get to in a second, Zane, is a lot of people are talking about local projects having structural implications. Now that by itself is really incredible, right? You're hearing Dick talk about employee ownership, literally having the ability to change employees' ownership to the very economy. So the question that I wanted to ask all of you, especially this being Bioneers, is what does the sharing economy, and y'all's specific examples, have to contribute to actually changing the very model of production? So ways to get into this, I think Karen, you might be able to talk a lot about this, of having a single good that isn't used by a single person, but is utilized by multiple people and ultimately producing the total amount that it's used.
So your question is really production and consumption.
Production and consumption, both sides of it. What do y'all think?
Yeah, I definitely think the sharing economy can be a very vital force for changing that whole paradigm and the need for the number of resources that we have. And Zane, in of course the conversation too, I think he says it more eloquently than I do too. But just basically, if you have a shared resource, for instance, an automobile too, you could put more. If you're going to share it, say amongst 10 to 15 people, you could actually, rather than just look for the cheapest car and pay $16,000, you could pay $20,000 or $25,000 for a much better vehicle that will be much more durable, that will be longer lasting, that has more fuel efficiency and so forth. So you can actually, as sharing things, you can pay for a better product that then, because that cost gets distributed amongst everybody, gets shared, but your cost to each individual is still lower, but you have a better product and you need significantly fewer of them to meet that need.
Well, one thing that we at the VHC can do that traditional rental properties. So we own, the VHC is a 501c3, it owns these properties, and then each of the houses has a rental agreement, a management agreement with the VHC. So the people that live in the houses manage the house, and they pay us money that we use to pay off the mortgages. But they're also paying the utilities, and each of the houses sends somebody to the board of the organization. So the whole organization is largely governed by the people that live within the properties that we own. And this gets rid of split incentives that are often a barrier to energy efficiency improvements in rental properties and other quality of life investments that you can make in rental properties. So, Boulder has some relatively forward-thinking regulations in this realm called smart regs where, you know, landlords have to meet some very basic level of energy efficiency in their janky old buildings that they just want to run into the ground. But the BHC doesn't have that problem. We've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, some grant money, some our own money, to pretty dramatically upgrade the energy efficiency of the buildings that we're in. You know, a couple of the buildings are 100 years old. One of them, the newest one, is about 60 years old. And as a result, partly as a result of that, partly as a result of, you know, just having a lot of people in the building, our buildings use about 1/3 as much energy per person as the regional average. So, you know, we've cut our energy use, including both electricity and natural gas, down by 2/3, partly by eliminating split incentives and partly just by more efficiently using the buildings. So that's a different type of relationship with the housing market that most renters have. And the comment I wanted to make on Russell, sorry. While there's a lull, so, you know, I also have a lot of distrust for the like federal level powers that be, but there are a lot of different levels of powers that be. And the closer you get to home, the less out of reach they are. So I would really strongly encourage everybody here not to check out from the city scale powers that be, maybe even the county scale powers that be, because, you know, I mean, what do we have? We had maybe 29,000 people vote in this most recent election, and we took down Excel's ballot measure by a 2-to-1 margin. And I am on the city's transportation advisory board because I volunteered with Community Cycles. So you can pretty easily get involved at the city scale, and you can take over the city scale powers that be. No, you really can. If you look at some of the most liberal little college towns in Europe, like Freiburg in Germany, or Groningen in the Netherlands, that have these like super uber green building standards and bike networks and stuff. The reason they're like that historically is you look back in the 70s somewhere, and a bunch of young green leftists all got elected to city council at some point, and they're like, we're going to change the rules. And, you know, so it takes work, it takes organization, but at the local level, the powers that be are mutable, and they should be changed.
And if you get all the local communities to do that, all of a sudden the whole state changes.
Yeah.
One of the groups that we are watching and we're learning from is called the Democracy Collaborative out of the University of Maryland. Gar Elfowitz has written a book and also a video that I brought, neither of them with me. But some of the point he's saying is it's some of what you're saying and some of what you said too. And that is, he said, we are not going to change the structure. And the structure is not going to correct us as is. It is just not going to do it. And it's because of everything you said. The bureaucrats there, you know, we can't do it. The money, the other things are so big and so powerful they can't. So what he's suggesting is really what Boulder's doing on Excel Energy. Like, I didn't know until I read his stuff, 25% of the public electricity for the cities around the nation are done by what you're trying to do at Boulder. You know, Colorado Springs has your for Collins. But 25%, he's saying we should be doing that at all levels. The city could run things and own things. Communities can own some land, of which that's a little bit what you're doing with your housing. You know, kind of the community owns the building, and you have control. And so he puts worker co-op in that same group. He says a couple of interesting things I have to say. He says the next time America has to take over General Motors, we keep it. The next time America has to take over the banks, we keep them. It's an interesting concept, but it's a very interesting where he said what we're doing is really part of another movement going on. And that's what's kind of interesting.
I've got something to add to maybe to change gears a little bit and talk about food. Because one thing I found that starting a grocery co-op is that food is owned by large corporations the majority of the time, actually most of the time. And unless you work with local producers where you can see their face and know where their food is coming from, you really don't know what you're eating or where it comes from or what it's made with. And that's a huge challenge the co-op is facing is how do you bypass large distribution centers and still create a full grocery store. And so what I'm finding is that we have to, as a group, as a collective, with membership, decide well, what's important for us to support in the food industry, because it's something that's kind of out of our control when it comes to government policy and environmental policy and on conventional farming and GMOs. But we can self-select as a cooperative what we decide to consume and who we want to support. So supporting the local food economy is the best way we can kind of keep it in the house and know where the hands are, who's touching the food. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge to really know where our food is coming from. And how the grocery co-op does is we try to figure out, well, where does it come from? And if we have to go through distribution companies, well, what is that company that is actually selling to the distribution companies? Because a lot of packaged food comes from places that have great morals. Companies that have great morals are doing the right thing, but they don't have a place. They've given up their self. They're not. Sorry to ramble, but they are not. They've passed being able to be their own distribution company. So they're selling out, essentially, so they can survive. And we have to figure out how we can support them without the corporate takeover. So the co-op is trying to do the best we can to figure out how to do that, but it really comes from what you want to eat and where your mind is. So that is really in members' control at this point. So as consumers, you have the control if you are a part of a co-op. If you go to another grocery store, you might not know. You might not care, but at least if you do want to start living your life and supporting a shared economy and being part of that economy, it might be a good idea to think about joining the food co-op.
So with those issues of scale, right, a lot of times what we see as companies who have a social or environmental message, as they grow, a lot of times they sort of lose focus on that original message as they chase after profits. And I think part of that has to do with scale, right? The larger the organization or the business gets, the harder it is to stay grounded in your local communities. So I think one thing I wanted to bring up with you all is, what issues do you all see with scale? As the bigger you get, can you stay true to your values? Is the sharing economy a way to sort of ensure integrity, or does scale necessarily mean selling out to some extent?
I'm going to respond quickly. I think it's a danger to always think of small is good. Probably is, but one of the largest co-ops in the world is in Spain, and it is struggled, but it's got 85,000 employee owners. And I've read the books where they struggled with the culture over the years of a 50-year business. But they are competing. They're competing on the world scene. They have manufacturing plants in Brazil, China, America. They are competing. They see themselves as a co-op competing with capitalism as we know it so well. And sometimes I don't, and I've mentioned these groceries, sometimes I don't think you can always say small is good. Small is good. It's nice. But we're not in that kind of world. It's a world that's going to eat us alive if we're not real careful. And I agree with you. The time is short.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I'm going to try to just say a little bit here, and then we can have some bounce back. But and I particularly know the transportation sector of the sharing economy, and it's been a hugely dynamic sector in the last 2 to 3 years, and even more so in the last year. I was just out at a shared mobility conference in San Francisco last month. And there is millions of dollars going into ride sharing and car sharing as well right now too. And ride sharing and car sharing are very different. I won't totally get into those two right now, but venture capitalism, money that's going into it. And looking at car sharing and where Zipcar started, and now that you have all the big car rental players, Hertz, Avis bought Zipcar. Hertz wants to outfit their entire car rental fleet with car sharing technology. Enterprise is in the game. U-Haul had been doing a piece of things too. So you've got all these major car rental companies that are getting into it because they think that there's some profit there, and there might be, but there's also what becomes their mission. How is it different? Car sharing, in our view, should be very different than traditional car rental. It's not just hourly car rental. We're transit based. We want to tie in with the local transit, and you're looking at the whole mode share shift. Car2Go is an example of a car manufacturer getting into the arena. So they produce cars specifically for car sharing and charge by the minute for the use of car share usage. What happens with that? Are you actually going to be pulling people off a bike and bus and into a car, which that's not the mode shift that we want to happen. So I think there's all sorts of these things and happening on a scale level, and it's transforming significantly. I also see like Airbnb, at least with my personal experience of how that scale grows. And the last couple times I stayed with Airbnb, I never even met the owner. They were gone. It was a very commercialized transaction. So I think, yeah, scale to me is a very interesting one. And I see, like, even within the sharing economy, I would almost say on a higher level, like it's going to become an efficiency economy. Like on the corporate level, they're looking for the efficiencies, and then there's a more local level where it's much more sharing and much more neighbor to neighbor and meet people. But there's going to be different like striations of how it happens. It can be very commercialized and very corporatized, and is that still the sharing economy versus I want to share a car with my neighbor and we're going to exchange a key and I know them directly and we're doing this peer-to-peer level.
Yeah, I think of it as having two kind of big classes of sharing economy kind of business models. One is where, you know, in the car sharing model, you've got a very underutilized resource, and, you know, by making more effective use of that resource, you know, you really have a more economically efficient system overall, and that is a readily corporatizable model. I mean, there's every reason to think that corporations will get into that because there's a very basic economic drive to do it. You know, it's cheaper per unit in driving to use a car 50% of the time than 5% of the time. Then there's the kind of worker-owned co-op end of things where really you're not taking a resource that wasn't being utilized and utilizing it. You're saying, actually, the way that we distribute the products of this work should be different. It shouldn't all go to, you know, the high and mighty shareholder. It should go to, you know, at least partly, if not entirely, to the people that are doing the work. So I feel like those are two different, and that's very directly in opposition to corporate scaling of the business. So I think the car share type thing where you're taking an underused or unused resource and using it is ripe for corporations coming in and trying to take over and probably changing the character of those businesses pretty dramatically. Commenting on that, I think the Spain model that you were talking about, Dick, is the Mondragon, and a lot of sharing or cooperative businesses run into financing difficulties as they try and scale up. Most for-profit private companies, when they decide that they want to scale up their operations, they go to the bond financing markets or the VC markets, or, you know, they have an IPO, and, you know, that's where financiers infuse capital into businesses to grow them quickly. And cooperative businesses that don't have profit as their sole goal don't have access to those same types of markets. And so one of the great things that the Mondragon Cooperative did was, one of the first things they cooperativized was the finance system. They took over the banks. They said, we're going to have banks that are essentially, you know, credit unions, but not at the like individual customer service level.
Seventh largest bank in Spain is the Bank of Mondragon.
It's a kind of a financial co-op that serves, you know, commercial and industrial customers within their co-op system. So
What
that's,
they did was the education. They have their own university.
yeah, another key access.
Half of education, have to train people.
So going back to this corporate level, I was wondering if you all could touch on for a second. There's a lot of conversation out there, right, of this has the potential to change the economy, to redirect the economy. But is this going to be co-opted by corporations? And are corporations essentially going to be able to outdo people with social and environmental messages? Maybe Russ can jump on that. I know Jordan has some things to say about Airbnb, and maybe also touch on what Airbnb is. But let's start with that one.
Yeah. So going back to the idea of we need to figure out how to scale up something big enough. I think what we're talking about really, you guys have talked about kind of like the economic sides of things, but I want to talk about like the civic action side of things, which is the thing that's going to keep the corporations in check. And so here's like a very concrete example that I've had, and I'm sure you guys have had. Who here has been in a position where you wanted to go participate in a protest or speak on behalf of a certain political issue, but because of your employer work situation, you didn't? Who's in that? Yeah. And the case that I'm thinking that really drove this home for me was when I took a bunch of students to Tim DeChristopher's trial. and I was afraid that I was going to lose my job. And there were 3 teachers who did that, and 2 did lose their jobs, and I didn't. And I'm proud of that. but we run into this feedback loop all the time in the economy of, unless you work for Patagonia, you're not going to be encouraged to go get arrested. But then if we just like switch this all around and we say, okay, we're going to be living in arrangements, whether they're like these small co-housing arrangements and using car shares and stuff like that, where you have suddenly this group of people that, because it's a peer-to-peer network, they're going to share those values with you. And so if you're hosting somebody to be politically active and they're gaining their basic needs through engagement in the community, and that person says, hey, I want to go get arrested over Keystone Pipeline, their host is going to say, yeah, I'll support you. I'll watch all your stuff. You want $50? Which is an entirely different situation than, oh God, if I do this, I could lose my job and I could lose everything. And so what I really see is this, is really having to make this switch in terms of how we set up the relationships in all aspects of our lives so that we're empowered to engage on that civic level. And that goes all the way down to those actual producer choices that you guys are talking about. Because when you have this accountability, I mean, the most concrete example for that one is just like, if you're growing food in your backyard, you're not going to put crap in it because you're going to eat it. And your friends are going to come over and you're going to give that to them. There's never any incentive to get bigger. And then there's like a third point. There's a book called Walk Out, Walk On. It's got some interesting ideas. But one of them is this difference between scaling up versus scaling across. And what I really like about the scaling across model is it's basically more of a saying, here's the DNA of ideas that we know that work. And we're going to share those ideas and we're going to let them replicate. And the internet's been really good with that, with like the commons, licensing, and things like that, where we're just broadly disseminating ideas. But I think that's actually our strategy for the long term. Because if you do have a pyramid, then it's easy to take out the top as soon as it becomes a threat to the status quo. But if you have a scaled across widely disseminated system, then you have an entirely different situation that's going to create the feedback loops to sustain it. So it's both economic and political.
Do you want me to talk about Airbnb or that sort of thing? I think that one thing that you see with corporatizing is you can grow things really fast, and that can be good or bad, and it depends on your goals. So if you're talking about resource efficiency, then that can be great. All of a sudden you have this giant scale peer-to-peer network where we're utilizing rooms and houses more fully when people are traveling and not using as much resource. I think you lose sight, though, of some of the more maybe human goals that you have. And the counter to Airbnb, which is a for-profit company that connects people with an extra room to people that are looking for a room, would be, I think, couch surfing, where you have people who have a room that they just want to share for free and are excited to meet people from different cultures, with people that are traveling around and are excited to get involved in the local community. And so with couch surfing, let's say you would have an incentive to really make sure that people have quality interactions with their host. And in terms of the living situation, no one cares. You're sleeping on the floor, you're sleeping in someone's backyard in your tent, anything like goes with that. Whereas when you're providing a service, you still are getting that sort of efficiency, but you're missing kind of the human part. And I see that both of these could play, an important role, just kind of depending where people's values and goals are. And I'd say that fast growth corporatizing is going to sort of get rid of the values that you have in a company, but is going to do a really good job of that efficiency use. And I think, Karen, you could probably talk a little bit about that with maybe what a corporate car share looks like, as opposed to a nonprofit, and reducing or encouraging public transit, as opposed to just saying we just want to get people out on the road. And they both have a place, maybe.
Yeah, I think the economy is so vast anyway that part of the sector that we're talking about too is I mean, all of these across the spectrum, I feel it's all having a net positive impact, like depending on, even if it is corporate Avis, Zipcar doing something like, if it's changing the paradigm and getting people to own fewer cars, I still feel, that's a really tremendously positive thing, I think. So but there's going to be a scale of sort of that community involvement and efficiency and what mission-wise, but I think that the paradigm shifts that's happening with all of it is great. There's more things, and I don't know if I want to say like equity issues though too. Like I don't necessarily view sharing economy things as inherently being like solving equity issues. For instance, even just like looking at car sharing, it's still for the not on the for-profit models. It's still for most people who are mid to upper income using the service, connected, have cell phone access, have web access. So you're not inherently getting that. We as a nonprofit try to do much more of that. In fact, we have a project in the next 2 years that works specifically in affordable housing developments and providing a multimodal toolkit that'll have a bus pass, bikes, car share, bundling that all together. That's something that you definitely wouldn't see on the for-profit side of things. But inherently, it's like there's still some things in our system for right now, like it's very heavily web dependent, and if you have a mobile phone, that help so much more efficient. And there's because at least for car sharing too and ride sharing, technology is such a key piece of this too. So right now, the early adopting and so forth, if you have access to technology, you're going to be able to utilize these systems a lot more effectively and a lot more user friendly. So, but because technology often goes with income levels and so forth, that it's not a fully equitable system, and so there's things to be addressed, but it's still also a lot of this is very new and in the early stages of it, and I think as we see all this evolve, hopefully the equity issues will get much more addressed. And even like Airbnb, like right now, like that, it's probably like it's fairly still mid to well income levels and educated, and even just knowing about Airbnb and that sort of thing, generally it's somebody with a smartphone or somebody with web access that is going to be tapping into those things. So
I don't think that's incidental. I mean, the reliance on technology that a lot of these business models have is fairly intrinsic, because these communications technologies dramatically reduce the kind of the transaction overhead, the transaction costs involved in sharing things. So it would maybe in an ideal world you'd be able to get away from that, but I think maybe a more ideal world is making sure that everybody has access to those communications tools. And I think we are actually rapidly hurtling towards that, for better or for worse. There's more than 1 billion cell phones in sub-Saharan Africa. And many of those countries will never have a landline network. They will only ever have a wireless network. And that's fine. So these aren't intrinsically exclusive technologies. They can be provided to basically everybody.
So I think that's a good place to stop with my questions. What I want to do right now is have a few questions, and I think it'd be best if it was a question directed at a specific panelist, and then we'll do that for maybe 5-10 minutes, and then we'll stop a little bit early. I think it's important to be able to sit around and network and talk with people doing interesting things, seeing that we're here to collaborate and not just listen. So does anyone have a question?
I had a question for Karen, and it's about the scaling issue of small enterprises that are nonprofit run, that are values, versus large enterprises that are corporate and might focus more on certain economy. How would you inject local values such as ecological health and connectivity in the community and stuff like that into a model that you want to scale up or into a larger organization? It seems to me that's the issue. Scaling great. Let's put human values.
Scaling with values.
how do you interject that in an organization or company that you don't want just to remain local, that you would like to scale very quickly, or how do you?
That you want to scale for any reason, or that it's going to scale anyway on its own.
So, like, I guess if scaling, like on our end, and I guess I'm speaking mostly from personal experience, like as we started, I mean, it was a grassroots community organization, so it was all, our values were intrinsically infused in that and became a foundational piece and still continues to be. And just for instance, even as we grow and scale, looking at our pricing model and the fact that we don't bundle our mileage in with the hourly rate, so that we still have the incentive that people drive less distance and shop locally and that sort of thing. So there's ways that you can build, I guess it's within pricing mechanisms and just your guiding principles of, where are you going to put profit in relation to other things? What are you really measuring your effectiveness by? So for instance, like us as a nonprofit, like yes, we do need to remain financially viable, but key metrics for us is how much are we reducing driving, how many cars are we getting rid of, how many members are car light or car free, and we're looking at what is that change that members have and evaluating it based on that. I don't know if I'm fully answering your question though.
I'm thinking like, well, what if Avis Rent-A-Car or something like that wants to start doing car share? How can we as a society kind of keep a value like reducing miles driven or reducing cars on the road or reducing cars seen?
That's a great question, and I'm just going to let Zay has a great answer to that one.
Well, so I, as a member of the Transportation Board, worked on the 2B, 2C, and 2D ballot initiative, which some of you may have seen, which was transportation funding for Boulder within 2B and 2D for the next 16 years via a sales tax, which is the most ridiculous way to fund transportation that I can think of, unfortunately. It also polled better than any of the other funding mechanisms. So it's regressive, it's totally disconnected from your transportation behavior, and for some reason it is popular. If you really wanted to kind of embed these values in your system, you would do something like a vehicle miles traveled tax to fund your transportation infrastructure. The Netherlands does this. Oregon is experimenting with it on a kind of a several thousand person level. And then you can do pay by the mile insurance. You can do pay by the mile, upkeep of your road and other transportation infrastructure. And people see a transparent cost, which is a lot of why they don't like it. Gas taxes also pull like crap because people don't want to be reminded every time they go to the pump, oh right, I have to pay for all this infrastructure. They want it to be like mysteriously dropping out of the sky, roads and sidewalks and stuff. So
please don't.
but I think having more transparent pricing mechanisms for our infrastructure, for our parking, which is exorbitantly expensive, but nobody sees the cost because it's almost always socialized, would be a great step towards, getting these costs out of the pricing model of the users. So regardless of whether you're Avis or Ego, you're gonna have to see those costs and make a decision as an economic actor based on those costs.
Nice. So let's do one last question. Is there someone that's burning with one?
Sorry, I don't know exactly which panelists to direct this towards, so I'll just throw it out there. But it seems like most of this aspect of the sharing economy that we've been talking about is coming more from the service side. But then there's the other side, another branch of the tree, if you will, of the production of goods. And so this notion of industrial ecology, where the waste of one industry becomes the fodder for the next. And so I'm wondering if any of you guys have any thoughts on that. I'll give a quick example. There's a brewery in Burlington, Vermont called Magic Hat, and they just recently teamed up with a company called Purpose Energy. Purpose Energy takes the wastewater from Magic Hat, that used to cost them $10,000 a month to have treated, and then they send that through a biodigester and make electricity and natural gas that makes them money. So this whole idea of sharing waste from one industry to the next. I don't know if that's big, yes.
I mean,
Just throwing it out there.
I've talked a lot, so somebody else.
Sure, do you got anything?
you got anything about sharing food with people that's normally wasted? They're not on the panel, but that's a good example.
I comment just briefly. Some of you know Mondragon, and you understand that. As Mondragon grew over the years, I'm not sure it was quite that pattern, but when a new need for a new side of product came up, they started another co-op that would make the next project. In other words, they made washing machines. Then they would start another co-op with some of the parts of the washing machine made somewhere else. Again, it's different. I don't know how much they've done on that. But they have taken a need where they had to buy it from somebody and then start their own. So there's another part that we're working on in Denver, whether we can get it going or not, but where some of the, it'd be like at the University of Colorado here, saying, what do we farm out? Because the university is enormous, it has a whole bunch of stuff. Cleveland is doing it with the Cleveland Clinic is having the laundry, and a group has set up a co-op laundry to do the laundry. Again, not quite right, but to say, here's a need, instead of sending it to some commercial laundry, send it to somebody that helps the community for the same price, has to be competitive. So it's a little different, but I think it's down that track.
I can answer that question kind of. One of the things that's come out of Transition Lab is that projects are emerging on their own, where people are saying, if you are using these models, we want people to help us build them, and there's money involved. So, like you said, a lot of those are in the service industry. We're looking at creating an affordable elder care business. We're creating school gardens. Actual products, but service industry. But then there's other things too, where it's like, as soon as you start creating a model that's more efficient, then you can use your revenues to create things in more efficient ways. So we're building a commercial kitchen to start a farm dinner business. And so it's an industry that's being created by the students to do it. And I think that that's really where the sharing economy has the biggest potential, because with all of these models that we're talking about, if you do it right, then everybody's actually wealthier and has more freedom, and that's what we want.
Nice wrap up.
There's one more question.
We got, okay, one last question over here.
I just listened earlier to B Corp presentation, and I thought maybe, so B Corp assesses businesses, and you have a target up here of what you need to reach to. Why not have a parallel for that with all of these models that says, that keeps the corporations out because they do not meet that bar? So that you have that standardization, I hate to say standardization, but it's, if you're B Corp or whatever standard, you are sustainable for, you meet these kinds of qualifications to be community valued. My other thought is, I see public libraries as a real vulnerability. They are a standard central usage for less fortunate, because they provide computers and a way to access general information. And as long as they're controlled by governments, who are controlled by corporations or, mixed models, I think that's one of our challenges, is to move public libraries to be really a resource, because they're going to be cut. We've already seen their hours, their personnel, their resources cut, and yet they are truly a central place for providing value to the less technology, to the less financially gifted, so, and all of this. And that's just a comment that I think we should be considering.
So Jordan, how about you jump in there? I think that's a really interesting point with B Corp, right? Like, how do we distinguish these businesses, these organizations as sharing economy, or these businesses as socially or environmentally responsible B Corps? So Jordan, maybe you can talk a little bit about the community mapping that you're doing with the sharing economy, and sort of what criteria people need to meet to run into that.
Right, so one thing that I've been trying to do is pull together a network of organizations that are involved in this sort of sharing economy umbrella. And part of that is determining, okay, are you, a for-profit who's trying to sort of exploit these group of people that are interested in sharing, or are you someone who's a community activist, or are you potentially a nonprofit who's somewhat separated from this but also kind of interested? And so I think one thing we can do is, as a community, kind of have some backing to this network and say, these are the criteria that we're interested in, these are the people that are allowed to be on our directories and on our maps, and that we kind of see as are contributing and meeting our goals. And I think that's a discussion to have with everyone and talk about, well, what are our goals? Is it to save money? Is that one of our goals? Because then the corporations can come in and say, we can do that. Or is it, environmental responsibility, which is probably something also that corporations can do pretty well? Is it connection between community members? Probably not something corporations can do. And so there's, I think, just creating these kind of maps and networks gives us a good way to sort of flag like which of these groups are meeting the criteria that are important to me as a consumer.